Welcome back to Boss Economics World. As always, I'm here to expose the truth behind the headlines, peel back the cover some bureaucrats put up, and reveal how their policies might just be sending our economy straight to the dumpster fire. Today, we're talking about none other than the incoming Treasury Secretary nominee, Scott Bessent. Now, folks, get ready for a wild ride, because Bessent, a hedge fund guru turned people's savior, is set to take the reins over the most bloated economic situation America has seen in decades. Spoiler alert, it ain't looking pretty. So, who is Scott Bessent? In a nutshell, he's a veteran hedge fund manager, who, after circling President Trump's orbit in recent years, is stepping into one of the most critical positions in government, the Treasury Secretary. And what is he walking into? An economy teetering on the edge of crisis, a federal debt hanging over our heads like the sword of Damocles, and a people exhausted from trade wars, looming tax hikes, and wage stagnation. Yes, folks, this is the mess we're dealing with. But, stick with me, because, as usual on this show, we're going to break it all down, satirize some insane policies, and absolutely call out the government on their mistakes. So, what is Bessent proposing? Let's start at square one, the issue consuming Washington today, those 2017 Trump tax cuts that are about to hit their expiration date. If you really want to understand why Bessent's confirmation is such a hot-button topic, you need to start with a tale as old as irresponsible government, the dangerous seduction of tax cuts. You see, in 2017, Donald Trump took a page out of Reagan's playbook and passed sweeping tax reforms, promising magical new heights of economic growth. Everyone gets tax cuts. Yay! But guess what? Those cuts didn't pay for themselves. They triggered a revenue shortfall that exploded our deficit. And now Bessent is warning Congress that we're barreling toward a $4 trillion tax hike at the end of 2025 if the government doesn't act. Let me break that number down for you, $4 trillion over the next decade. Imagine getting smacked with that bill. And folks, who does Bessent say is going to suffer? The middle class and working class Americans, of course. Here we are, 2 years post-pandemic, with workers already reeling under rising costs, while wage growth has stubbornly lagged behind inflation. Middle-class families are juggling inflation like circus clowns, while their asterisk wages, tragically, haven't kept pace. Real wages have fallen by almost 4% between 2021 and mid-2024. And now, the prospect of these expiring tax cuts means that mom and pop down the street will soon feel the blow of a potential fiscal knockout punch. Now Bessent is practically saying, Congress, save them. Renew the cuts and avert disaster. But here's the kicker, what happens if these tax cuts get extended? Oh, the sitting national debt continues to skyrocket, racing well past $40 trillion by 2030. And who's footing the bill eventually? You. The taxpayer. Meanwhile, government overspending rolls on like there's no tomorrow. Now, let's slow down and pull back this hypocritical curtain, shall we? Bessent's hawking this extension of tax cuts under the banner of fiscal apocalypse, but what's his solution for the corresponding hole in federal revenues? Spoiler alert, he doesn't have one. Extend those tax cuts, he says. But here's the thing, that extension is being touted as a band-aid over a hemorrhaging treasury. Right here, you smell the convenient amnesia of trickle-down economics. Sure, rich folks and corporations pocket part of the pie, but the promised trickle-down to everyday Americans? Am I, like always? Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's Analytics, recently put it best, Trump-era tax cuts actually ended up raising the debt by a whopping $2 trillion over the last 4 years. That's right, America, trickle-down strikes again. So, what's happening here? Bessent is playing the classic HEDGE playbook. You juice financial and corporate markets by slashing taxes on the wealthy while piling burdens onto lower and middle-class taxpayers. Mix in a few go-to-fear tactics, the economy will collapse, or it'll hit the middle class hardest. Suddenly, everyone's scrambling to save billions for the fat cats at the top, and, oops, we kick the debt can further down the road for the next administration. Let's talk about America's sordid love affair with debt. The national debt stands at nearly $33 trillion as we start 2025, and surprise, surprise, Bessent tells us he's, and I quote, not going to let the U.S. default on its debt while he's in office. Wow. A whole lot of confidence for a guy walking into a $28 trillion ticking time bomb rendered worse by unprecedented deficit spending post-pandemic. The man's a hedge fund manager, so it's no surprise Bessent can juggle numbers, but here's the irony, folks, his background in Wall Street excludes the realities of national fiscal health. He comes from the easy money school of finance, where you just keep printing cash and deferring fiscal payback. Heck. U.S. debt issuance soared by 50% post-pandemic, so what's Bessent's pathway to bringing control back to spending? More impressively vague answers. Now, if you thought that's all we have to worry about, let's also touch on that delicious little jab Senator Bernie Sanders threw at Bessent, asking if America's government was about to be run by oligarchs, those super wealthy few who pull the strings behind its facade of democracy. And, surprise, surprise, Sanders' biting commentary about billionaires pulling the levers of power. Totally spot on. Let's not miss the fact that 2 weeks ago, President Biden granted the Medal of Honor to David Rubenstein and George Soros, both billionaires, movers, shakers, and, in one way or another, influencers in Washington. Now, here's Sanders. Is an oligarchy about to seize control of America? Bessent, predictably, resorts to evasion, refusing to name names but firing back with, well, someone did give 2 billionaires those medals. Ouch. Zing. Is anyone else concerned by the sheer concentration of wealth and influence in American decision-making? Top 1% of earners in this country now own 31.4% of all household wealth in America. And let's face it folks, when the people at the top cozy up with politics, middle-class dreams of upward mobility, they take a back seat. We're headed toward feudalism 2.0. Okay, stop me if you've heard this one before. A Treasury nominee only inches away from controlling U.S. economic dynamics basically declares war on China, but hold up, economically, of course. Cue the dramatic music. The Chinese economy is the most unbalanced in human history, and rather than fixing their domestic recession problems, Beijing is attempting to export its way out. They're funding their military on the backs of global trade imbalances, says Bessent. Whoa, slow down Mr. Wall Street. Sound familiar? Yep, more Cold War rhetoric that's designed to keep the American public distracted from what's going wrong at home. Don't get me wrong, the Chinese economy has faced severe setbacks, thanks to a housing bubble that popped worse than a diet soda, but, is railing against China really our grand economic strategy? Trade imbalances with China? That ship sailed back in the 2000s. At this point, China and the US are like quarreling spouses, too intertwined to realistically divorce. And instead of genuinely discussing solutions to close America's $256 billion trade deficit with China or deal with global currency dynamics, Bessent's over here, fearmongering about the next world-reshaping Cold War. Bessent wasn't done there either. Responding to questions about sanctions on Russia, Bessent suggests that dialing up economic pressure on the Russian oil industry is a solution to ending the war in Ukraine. But hold on. Let's remember that Russia's cash cow is energy, which Europe and other nations still rely on. Despite sanctions, Russia's oil exports in 2024 racked up a massive revenue stream. You can sanction them all you want, but has it worked, or is the global demand for energy turning sanction measures into a toothless tool of US control? What are we left with? An economy caught in the crossfire of geopolitical posturing. Heat up sanctions too much, oil prices spike globally, ease off a little and, oh boy, we've enabled Russia. It's like a high-stakes poker game, and meanwhile American workers, who rely on affordable energy, get to suffer while politicians play global chess. So, what's next for America under Scott Bessent? As much wealth as this hedge fund genius has accumulated, you've got to wonder, is he really the answer we've been waiting for, or just the latest economic tinkerer who's here to unfairly squeeze the middle class, keep rich corporate interests protected, and keep kicking the debt can down to the shoes of future taxpayers? Bessent's policy hints make one thing clear: his loyalty lies with the Wall Street elite. His talk might say middle-class priorities, but let's be real. His policies could once again disproportionately impact those at the bottom of the totem pole, while the top 1% continue to solidify their stranglehold on wealth. With a deficit crisis looming, tax cuts about to expire, and another billionaire whisperer whispering sweet nothings into Trump's economic playbook, my advice to you is, buckle up. This economic roller coaster ride is far from over. That's it for today's fire-hot commentary from Boss Economics World. Drop a like, share with your fellow truth seekers, and subscribe for more hard-hitting analysis that the mainstream won't dare touch. And remember, the next time Washington tells you it's just business as usual, don't buy what they're selling, because you know there's always something messy underneath. Thanks for tuning in, folks.